Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Thursday, April 14th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The spring game is in 2 days, the Notre Dame game in 142 days, the game against Michigan in 226 days. There is just one more practice left before Saturday's spring game. That will happen tomorrow. A little bit later on today, however, head coach Ryan Day is going to have his final pre-spring press conference. You're going to get a chance to hear some of the more interesting things that he had to say on tomorrow's morning show. But today, you're going to have the pleasure of hearing from Kevin Noon. He is the host of the Big Me Kickoff podcast. He is also my guest this morning. Kevin, thanks for being here.
Absolutely, anytime.
So the spring game to me is one of those things that's always a little more exciting than it should be. You know, it's always a nice chance to go out and enjoy a nice warm spring day in the horseshoe, but the game itself can be, let's say, hit or miss. This year, we just learned on Wednesday that the teams are presumably going to be broken up just into offense and defense. The offense is the scarlet, the defense is the gray. We'll get a bunch more detail from Ryan Day a little later on today. It sounds like this might be a little less like a normal game, with the touchdowns are 6 points, field goals are 3 points, kind of scoring you see in the fall. This may be one of the more non-traditional editions of these games that we've sort of seen over the years where the defense gets certain numbers of points for, getting a 3 and out and that kind of stuff. I mean, does that impact at all the event? It's, the experience of the event to you if it's not like a traditional football game?
Yeah, we're going back to the Jim Tressel days of where it would be, there's a X amount of points for 3 and out, but nobody's really quite sure. And you just look to the scoreboard and suddenly the numbers are changing. And then, we're at the end and we're having one play to decide it all, even though there was a 17-point difference between them. No, I mean, I think that there's going to be an issue in terms of, fans aren't going to necessarily be able to follow along in terms of what they're used to with a traditional game in terms of scoring. But I mean, let's be real. Spring games for Ohio State have been anything but, real games as of late. And, when we had a chance to talk to Jim Knowles earlier this spring practice period, he talked about that there really wasn't going to be real tackling. And even in terms of practice, I mean, it's about, getting yourself in the positions and things there. And I would assume that we're going to learn later today that it's going to be a game of thud. So as long as you go in with realistic expectations that you're not going to be seeing a week 6 game against Wisconsin here on whatever April 16th when the spring game goes on, and you're just out there to have a good time and have maybe better seats than you'll ever have at Ohio Stadium and pay for some overpriced concessions. No, it shouldn't be an issue. I think all of us will be sitting there going through the tape later and trying to figure this out and that out. I mean, which is what makes it fun. But yeah, it's going to be anything but a normal operation, in my opinion.
Yeah, this is, I had Ross Fulton on the morning show a couple days ago to talk about, what he's looking for schematically, like what you can actually learn, what means something, what doesn't mean something when you see it in the spring game. And regardless of how they're scoring the game, there are still guys individually who potentially have a chance to do something big on Saturday. This is obviously the last spring practice, the last chance for them to make an impression on the coaches and, a formal on-field team setting until fall camp. Today, we're going to talk about a few of the guys with a lot on the line. Let's start on that defense. To me, at safety, maybe the guy with the most to gain is Cam Martinez. He is battling Tanner McAllister for the starting nickel job. And, it sounds like McAllister's a little ahead right now. But Martinez is the kind of guy who, he's athletic. I picked him on my fantasy spring game team because I think he's the kind of guy that has the opportunity to make a big play, have an interception, run it back for a touchdown kind of play. He seems like someone who has an opportunity to win himself a little bit more of a role this fall with a good performance on Saturday.
Yeah, while I don't think anybody's going to come out and just blatantly say from the team that it is Tanner McAllister's position, I think you'd be hard-pressed to really find anybody who believes it's not Tanner McAllister's position, but I think Cameron Martinez can certainly cobble out an argument to need to be out there on the field and to see some meaningful reps along the way. Let's not forget Cameron Martinez was a former Gatorade Player of the Year on offense out of the state of Michigan, learning the defensive side of the ball as an everyday type of role. You could see some moments last year of where the light bulb had really started to come on for him and he was making plays. Now he sits there and he looks at a guy who was in Jim Knowles' system at his previous stop at Oklahoma State, who's now ahead of him on the depth chart. But this is going to be very important for Cam Martinez to be able to get out there as they're going to try. I mean, let's remember, they're going to roll everybody out there that they can roll out there. This isn't a you play to win the game situation. We're not going to see the ones out there for most of the game to try and make sure that the Scarlet gets that win or that the Gray gets that win. That's not what this is about. It's about getting everybody on tape so the coaches have something to coach off of, because they can't work with the players directly with the football once we get out of the spring practice period. And I agree. I think Cameron Martinez is somebody who has a ton to gain with a good day on Saturday in whatever iteration we see of football.
Yeah, we talked about this before the show, kind of put together a list of guys who we thought, between you and I, like guys who we thought maybe had a lot to gain with a good performance on Saturday. Ended up with 7, and it essentially almost was 1 per unit. But there were a couple spots where it was just kind of like, yeah, man, that whole room, that is a huge, this is potentially a point of differentiation for a whole room of guys. One of those was the linebacker unit. It feels like right now, Steele Chambers and Tommy Eichenberg seem like they're maybe a little bit out front of the rest of the field right now. But to me, I mean, everyone from like Chip Trainum to Raja Mitchell to CJ Hicks has a chance to maybe work their way into more playing time with finishing the spring strong here.
Yeah, I mean, it's just everybody at this point, and you're right. I think that Steele Chambers and Tommy Eichenberg are kind of the de facto top of the of the chain right now, but that doesn't mean anything here at this point, because you bring in so many new members of the defensive coaching staff. You bring in Jim Knowles, who will be working with linebackers. He could see things completely differently. We don't know. So everybody in that room has a ton to prove. You sat there and took one of the names of the people that I'm most interested in seeing, and that is Chip Trainum as he makes the move from offense to defense. What does that end up looking like? What does a very young, very green in terms of the college game CJ Hicks look like? You just wonder what so many of these guys, I mean, and they were just so dinged up at linebacker. How hard do they push certain guys through, even if they've been cleared through spring? I think it's going to be a big opportunity to see a lot of guys getting a lot of reps because of just the nature of the system. But, with that being said, and we'll get into this, I know, here in a couple minutes, this is more of a passing exhibition than a running exhibition due to how things are set up. So, I don't know if we're really going to have a lot of questions answered when it comes to linebacker, other than, all right, who's the first group out there? Who's the next group out there? What are some of the substitution patterns that they're doing? We'll talk at length about it after the fact, but how much we truly know, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and the intriguing thing to me about the linebackers is you're right. I mean, this is not a game where you typically see a lot of running the football, so this is not going to necessarily be a who's got the good run fits and who's who is sticking and wrapping in the hole and all that kind of stuff. This is much more, to me. I mean, Jim Knowles has talked about linebackers needing to be able to go sideline to sideline and play in space and being able to cover guys. Maybe you're going to see a little bit more of that, and we'll get to maybe the running back passing game in a few guys from now. But you may see which linebackers are playing well in space, because that's something that seems like something that Knowles is going to be emphasizing this year. On the defensive line, there are a couple good names that you could talk about. Caden Curry is certainly one of them. He just lost his black stripe. First true freshman to lose his second true freshman to lose his black stripe. So he's someone who I think is a potential breakout, Jack Sawyer type player from last year's spring game with 3 sacks. Like, he may have that kind of opportunity if the game plays out the way it kind of did last year. But to me, the guy with the most to gain immediately is Mitchell Melton. He, of course, missed all of last year. He was a linebacker, missed all last year with an injury. But you keep hearing good things about him this spring at the jack position. If he can grab some playing time at a new spot, and really kind of do something with it on Saturday, I think that's going to be potentially huge for what that could mean for him for this fall.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's somebody that you've really been trying to find a spot for. I mean, he's just, for one reason or another, has not been able to really kind of break through. You see this Jack spot, and for those of you who are like, Jack, obviously you're not watching the morning scoop enough. I mean, that's the Leo, which, you have to earn the name Leo because that's the king of the jungle. I'm very curious to see what Mitchell Melton looks like there, because he's somebody you don't think about. You look back at his recruiting class, we don't necessarily talk about him because he hasn't played a ton. So, what does that look like? What is he able to do? I mean, there certainly is going to be an opportunity for these linemen to do a thing or two. I mean, we're not necessarily, if it is truly offense, defense, we're not going to see split offensive lines where it's like 2 starters and then 3 guys that are like third teamers making a line. So, guys are going to have the opportunity to hopefully go against, all right, the ones are out there. Now the twos are out there. Now there's going to be a mix up of ones and twos. So it may not be a case of where Jack Sawyer was getting in there and just wreaking havoc last year because of going against kind of as I said, a broken offensive line. So I'll be really curious because the reports have been pretty good. Um, but you see a guy making a position change, not everybody is as immediately successful as a Steel Chambers is. So we'll have to kind of see what that looks like, and it'll be interesting to see what's been drawn up in the laboratory.
And so that's the defensive line. Let's just go right across the line of scrimmage to the offensive line since we're talking about them. The depth there is the question, and that to me, it's like who has the most to gain on Saturday? Literally every offensive lineman outside of the top 5. It feels like we have a pretty good sense that it's going to be Paris Johnson and Donovan Jackson and Luke Whippler and Matt Jones and DeJuan Jones. And the question is, and then what? Because you've had Josh Pryor, who I think they're fairly high on. He's been banged up this spring, hasn't really been going all that much. And then beyond them, I think the depth is really the question. I mean, it sounds like they feel great about the starters, but everything behind them is pretty wide open. So if someone has a good, someone finishes the spring strong on Saturday, that could put them in a pretty good position to be one of those top 6, top 7, top 8 kind of guys going into the fall on that offensive line.
Yeah, I think Josh Pryor would find himself in that grouping if he were healthy. I think Enoch Vimahi is somebody who I kind of have penciled as my 6th man on the offensive line. I don't know if he can I don't think he can play all 5 positions though. So being the 6th man is if things fit. But who's going to step up? A name that we've heard a little bit more this spring than we have in past years, Jacob James. What does he look like in his backup role? Who is really going to be able to step into some of those spots, because that's what made Ohio State's offensive line so great last year. They didn't have to really get 7 and 8 deep last year, but they truly were 7, 8 deep. And that's, we've seen a lot of years where Ohio State's been about 5.5 deep. I think that when it's all said and done, I think Ohio State certainly can get to 7. It would be a lot better if they get further. Year 1 with Justin Fry as the new offensive line coach. So again, I don't think that there are a lot of preconceived notions about this guy or that guy. Well, you haven't done anything for 2 years. Well, I haven't seen it. So let me kind of see what you're capable of doing. So again, as we talked about with linebackers, I'll be very interested in seeing substitution patterns. I'll be curious to see when it's like, okay, these are the twos. Let's see what they look like. And you will have to kind of go through and, all right, well, let's remember he's hurt and whatever. And even though it's like, well, I know for sure this is the twos. No, no, it isn't necessarily going to be the case. And then, Ohio State's bringing in a 4-man class, but I think it's a pretty big ask to expect any of those true freshmen to come in and necessarily be that guy. I mean, you could sit there and say, well, is George Fitzpatrick, is he somebody who could step into one of those roles? I mean, you just don't know at this point. So offensive line is going to be so important, and it's a position that's high on my radar just because any position with a new coach this year is something that's going to draw my eye.
Yeah, and now we are through the positions with the new coaches this spring, but yeah, there is a lot of additional intrigue in those spots, but there is plenty of intrigue because the next 3 are all positions that people are going to spend a lot of time thinking about and a lot of time talking about. Quarterback, running back, and wide receiver. So quarterback, the guy who Tony Gerderman took number 1 overall in our spring game fantasy draft, Kyle McCord. He kind of fits the profile of the guy who gets a pretty good amount of time and has been in the system for a year and kind of knows what he's doing and is sort of set up to have a pretty big day. If he can have a pretty big day, he's got, there has been sort of positive vibes coming out about Devin Brown this spring as well. And, that he's a true freshman. There's a long way to go. But, it sure sounds like they like what they have with Devin Brown. So if Kyle McCord has an opportunity to put a little bit of space between himself and Devin Brown and really establish himself as that number 2 guy this fall, that seems like that would be a very, very big thing for him to be able to do on Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a good chance for Kyle McCord to sit there and get some distance in that race for the backup quarterback position. I mean, it is a big ask to expect, to think that Devin Brown is going to come in as a kid who has not played a down of college football to come in and become the backup to a Heisman trophy finalist in CJ Stroud, but you certainly hear McCord and Brown mentioned very, very close to one another in terms of the conversations of what we hear coming out of camp. Whether or not whether or not it's there's a 10% difference or an 80% difference, we don't know at this point. But it'll be really important for McCord, who we expect to see a good number of reps, because Ohio State will trot CJ Stroud out there for a couple of series, wow the fans who paid $7 or $30 to come out there and check things out, and then put him in bubble wrap for the rest of there and let him have a headphones on and be able maybe even call a couple plays. I don't know, because it's going to be McCord and Brown the rest of the way. And I don't think that if Kyle McCord puts just gigantic spacing between he and Devin Brown, that doesn't mean we've answered who's going to be the successor in 2023. We're talking about who's coming out of spring practice 2022 as the number 2. And while I don't think anybody's really expecting to be Devin Brown, if Kyle McCord doesn't have a great day and Devin Brown goes ham, then what happens? Then you certainly have a lot of questions there, and then people are already kind of panicking over the fact that it's a quarterback room with only 3 scholarship guys right now. What does that mean? If Kyle McCord does poorly, does he just get pissed off and leave? There's so much intrigue there that it's really easy for your eye to be drawn to watch the quarterbacks at an event like that. That's just how we're conditioned to watch football in the first place, offensive football. But I think it'll be warranted, just because I think there are a lot of interesting subplots here.
And you got to remember, last year Jack Miller came out of spring ball still kind of nominally the number 2 quarterback. When we saw them in fall camp, Jack Miller was repping ahead of Kyle McCord, and then at some point in fall camp, Kyle McCord jumped Jack Miller. So it is possible for a true freshman to jump a second-year guy, whether it's in the spring or in the fall, and it's possible for that change. Whoever comes out of spring is the number 2 to not necessarily be the number 2 when the season starts. So yeah, there's still a lot of football to be played, and a lot of football to be practiced, and a lot of film to be watched, and all of that stuff between now and the Notre Dame game. You talked a little bit earlier about, this is not really a running back kind of game. The way they typically do this, especially if it's 2-hand touch, if you were a running back whose job is to make the first guy miss in the hole, well, it's pretty hard to make the guy miss if all he has to do is get a hand on you and you're down. So the running backs, this isn't, don't expect a big day from any of the running backs. But of the 3 healthy scholarship running backs on this team right now, Travian, Henderson, Mayan, Williams, and Evan Pryor, it feels like Evan Pryor maybe has the most to gain out of any of those 3 guys this weekend.
Yeah, he's certainly he's a pass catching threat. So if anybody that this is kind of shaping up for, Evan Pryor's pass catching is something that he might be the best pass catching running back on the team, in my opinion, just based on potential. I had the opportunity to see him in high school, some things that I've seen there, but you sit there and you wonder what the running back room is going to look like. Obviously, there's no Marcus Crowley at this point. Dallin Hayden is not, part of the team yet, so you're down to 3 guys. Can Evan Pryor leave enough of an impression to be the? I think that we all kind of expect Mayan Williams to be the 2. I just think that that's what's going to be the case. But then what happens? Could Evan Pryor do enough here? We don't know necessarily where Marcus Crowley is in terms of his injury recovery. Let's remember, he's been oft injured in his collegiate career. He's just had some horrible luck there. So I think that if Evan Pryor is able to come out there and show that he can block a little bit better, we all go back to the play of where he tried to block an incoming rusher and he got blown the hell up because he just hadn't had a chance to put weight on in Mickey Marotti's weight program. He hadn't had a chance to really get rocked up. I don't think he's going to have somebody coming at him at 110% the way that there was in that one game. But if he can sit there and show some strides, I think that there's so much upside with what Evan Pryor can do. He certainly can do a lot of work toward showing the coaches he needs to be a more active part of the offense.
And the interesting thing with him is, even if you are just, if your primary role is as the best pass catcher out of the backfield, like you mentioned, look at Michigan last year. Donovan Edwards was a true freshman last year and really made his biggest impact in the passing game. He was behind Blake Corum. He was behind Hassan Haskins, on the depth chart in the similar way, similarly to how Pryor is potentially behind Henderson and Mayan Williams this year, but there still could be a role carved out for him in some form. But if you're going to be the pass catching, the pass catching third down back kind of guy, well, you also have to be able to do the blitz pickup piece. That's a very important part. You can't just be the one trick pony. You've got to be able to do the whole thing. So yeah, you're right. This is a chance to kind of show significant progress on a couple of those fronts, and put himself into position for some kind of role this year, whether it's as the number 2 back or the number 3 back in more situational role. We'll see, but that'll all start on Saturday for him. Last guy is, I think, probably one of the people who, if you ask the average Ohio State fan who has the most to gain, this might be the first name that they say. Julian Fleming. He is finally healthy. He's missed, he missed the spring game last year with an injury. He didn't get to play the spring game, obviously, the year before that. He's missed a bunch of time with various injuries. It sounds like he's finally healthy. Can he have a breakout game? This is there is an opportunity. There are two open starting spots this year with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave gone. This is Julian Fleming's chance to finally kind of make good on the recruiting rankings. You keep hearing this great stuff about him and just incredible playmaking ability, and it just largely because of health hasn't happened yet for him on the field. This seems like a golden opportunity for him to finally show some of that during the games. All the good stuff that you've heard about him doing during practices.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, we know what Ohio State has in Jackson Smith and Jigba. We certainly have seen the opening crescendo of Marvin Harrison Jr.'s career with what he did in the Rose Bowl. Who else is going to be able to step up? I mean, I think that we probably to this date, just due to health and everything, we've seen more out of Emeka Egbuka than we have out of Julian Fleming. So can Julian Fleming get out there and play and be able to make the plays that everybody's come to expect as a 5-star? Certainly services have had him as a number 1 receiver coming out of high school, and it just hasn't been there due to injury after injury. And then you're going to have young guys who are going to be nipping at his heels. Oh, and you also have Jaden Ballard, who I think is somebody else that we could probably talk about. Somebody who came out of the state of Ohio, came out of Massillon. He's had a really good spring. If Jaden Ballard comes out there and has a much better day than Julian Fleming, what does that mean at that point? Because then, you look at this talented receiver class he came out of, and he's going to be trailing everybody in that class. And I think that's going to be an issue. So, I would not be surprised to see Stroud and Brown and McCord targeting Julian Fleming a little bit more. Let's see what he can do. Let's see what's going on there. Plus, too, he's just going to give you a really good look, especially when we're seeing what some of these backup corners are going to be doing, and Ja'Kalen Johnson and Jordan Hancock, guys that, as we've talked about a quarter of the team, we didn't even talk so much about the corner position. So, yeah, I think it's going to be very important for Fleming to have not only a strong showing, but to come out of spring healthy, no dings, no dents, nothing, and be able to say, look, I have been able to continue this process. And I'll throw one more name in at the position that we haven't even talked about, Cam Babb. I mean, Cam Babb is somebody who, we're talking about guys who've been oft injured. That's Cameron Babb. And, I'll be interested to see if he's able to get out and do anything, because whenever we hear, somebody may have gotten hurt in practice, the immediate reaction is, oh God, I hope it's not Cameron Babb, that poor kid. He just can't seem to catch a break. If he's healthy and is able to go and is able to do some of the things that he was able to do coming out of high school, once again, that room is going to be so deep, and it's just going to be difficult to earn your catches.
Yeah, and I think the interesting point to make here is just because someone isn't playing on Saturday doesn't necessarily mean there's a serious injury. A lot of times they are very, very cautious with this. If a guy, especially guys who haven't played a ton, or guys who have played a decent amount, guys who are a little more veteran, if you have a little bit of a hamstring tweak, you have a little bit of an ankle turn, like they are very, very cautious with that, because there's not a ton to be gained, especially for the guys who have, sort of already established themselves. So if, Saturday morning rolls around and they say, CJ Stroud's not playing, do not immediately assume season-ending injury. That could be, probably not a hangnail, but, much closer to a hangnail than season-ending injury, with kind of veteran guys if you don't see them on Saturday. But of the guys that we do see on Saturday, those were a bunch of them with a lot to gain. And, as Kevin said, like, we didn't even talk about the young cornerbacks because Jordan Hancock, J.K. Johnson, like, that's a whole separate conversation. A lot of the young wide receivers, there's so much talent on this team. And, the ceiling is so high for this team that you're going to have to earn your spot on the field. There's not going to be a lot of default starters this year. So this is a real opportunity for guys to kind of show up and show out one last time before they take a break for summer. And we start the countdown towards fall camp. So that'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.